specifically about Haitians, and this is from the Times reporting. Apparently, the president is quoted as saying Haiti had sent 15,000 people. They, quote, all have AIDS, he grumbled, according to one person who attended the meeting, and another person who was briefed about it by a different person who was there. The president also had some choice words about Nigerian immigrants. Here again from the Times, quote, 40,000 had come from Nigeria, Mr. Trump added. Once they had seen the United States, they would never, quote, go back to their huts in Africa, recalled the two officials who asked for anonymity to discuss a sensitive conversation in the Oval Office. The White House and Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, refuted the reporting in the New York Times, saying that the president did not make these statements. She provided CNN with verbatim the same statement that was provided to the New York Times. She writes, quote, General Kelly, General McMaster, Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Nielsen, and all other senior staff actually in the meeting deny these outrageous claims, and it is both sad and telling the New York Times would print the lies of their anonymous sources anyway. This is certainly not something that the White House was likely expecting to have to respond to. It appeared to be an uneventful Christmas vacation down here in Mar-a-Lago. The president spent most of today golfing before heading back to the Mar-a-Lago estate. But on this first full day at Mar-a-Lago, the White House on the defensive, having to deal with a distraction that they likely did not want to talk about, especially considering that just yesterday the president signed his first major legislative victory, the tax reform bill, into law. Pam?
That's right. And the White House today really going after them for using sources who had requested anonymity. Thank you so much, Boris Sanchez. And last hour, I actually talked to Michael Shear, one of the New York Times reporters who broke this story, and he told me that he stands by his reporting.
My colleague Julie Davis and I set out 3 months ago to write a story that sort of chronicled President Trump's efforts on immigration, how that effort had evolved from the time he was a candidate and through the first year in the presidency. And part of that, as part of that reporting, we began to hear about this meeting from multiple people, and we heard different stories, and as a reporter, you put it together the best you can from both people that were in the meeting, people that were had talked to folks that were in the meeting, and at the end of the day, we came to believe that the report, as we produced it and published it today, was accurate, was true, and the White House did push back very forcefully. We included their denial in the report that we published on the website today, but we stand by our story.
Two sources told you Trump made these remarks, but other officials say he never used the words huts or AIDS. Why do you find these two sources that you use for the story more credible than those who are denying it on the record?
Well, look, I mean, that's, as you well know, Pam, I mean, that's something that you do every day as a reporter, is you weigh the motivations of your sources, you weigh, the kind of detail that they told you, how they described events, and whether they, are consistent over time and the like. And we came to believe that the people that were telling us this, described this meeting accurately. We didn't just listen to them. We tried to talk to a whole lot of people, and you're right, we did talk to some people who said they didn't recall those comments being made back in June. And then, as you say, the White House, gave us a statement saying that several of the top officials that were in the meeting denied it. But at the end of the day, after deliberation and looking at our reporting, we stand by the story.
And that was Michael Shear of the New York Times. And I want to get more perspective on this from our panel. With me now, Deputy Managing Editor of the Weekly Standard, Kelly Jane Torrance, and CNN political senior reporter Stephen Collinson. Thank you both for coming on. Stephen, what do you make of what we just heard from, what do you make of this reporting here about what the president allegedly said in the Oval Office?
Well, these are two very careful reporters, and it seems to be a very deeply sourced report. Clearly, if the president, as the president of the United States, had said those things, it would be seen as deeply offensive to many people. But whatever went on in the Oval Office and what is detailed in this report, I think it gets to something deep about the president's immigration policies and the root of those policies. Critics have long believed that the president's immigration policies are rooted in racism, and they point to the kind of language he's used when referring to Mexicans way back at the start of his campaign in 2015, the kind of language and rhetoric he's used around the Muslim ban. So this report certainly will reinforce the belief of people who believe that the president's motivation here is based on prejudice as much as anything else. Having said that, if you talk to Trump supporters, and one of the reasons that they like the president so much is that they believe that his immigration policy is based simply in a sort of desire to make Americans safe, to keep out what they would see as undesirable people, to cut the number of refugees from dangerous places in the world where wars are raging, where terrorism is prevalent. So while this is a huge story, I don't think it's going to meaningfully shift the political debate on immigration. If you're disposed to be suspicious of the president, this will reinforce that. If you believe in the president's immigration policies, I don't think anything that he's said in this report, which the White House has denied, is going to change your opinion.
And Kelly, I want to go to you now because, as Stephen said, this could indicate some prejudice. The New York Times article says that the president's views toward immigration has evolved over many years, well before he ever entered politics. What do you make of that?
Well, and that's what you have to do. Like Stephen says, look at the evidence. And look, if you want to go to a more skills-based system of immigration, which Canada and Australia have, keep in mind, though, that they also have a separate system for refugees. If you want to do that, you do that based on study. You do that based on data. I mean, hard work and talent have no geographical or racial bounds. But when you hear a man saying things like, as allegedly the president said, all Haitians have AIDS. By the way, I looked, and the prevalence rate for adults aged 15 to 49 in Haiti is 2.1%. Have HIV or AIDS. Now, that's not a great number, but it's certainly nowhere near everyone from Haiti having AIDS. And when you hear an uninformed remark like that, you have to wonder, is his policy more broadly based on such uninformed, I hesitate to call it thinking. It really is instinct, I think, as the New York Times sort of indicated.
And, Stephen, for me personally, I covered the travel ban very early on in the administration, and you really see an evolution in terms of how the White House is trying to deal with immigration and, create policy from the beginning when it was total chaos with the travel ban to now, and seeing how they deal with refugees and so forth.
Yeah, that's right, Pam. You remember those early months of the administration, especially when the travel ban came in the early weeks, was chaotic. There were people at airports who didn't know if they were going to be able to get into the country or get on even planes outside the United States. There were border officials who weren't really clear about what the rules, when they were coming to force and what they meant. It has got a lot more sort of methodical. I think one of the reasons, of course, is that you've got John Kelly now, who is the Chief of Staff, who was at the Homeland Security Agency department, who is clearly a key player in the administration's immigration policies. So I think many of Donald Trump's supporters would say that they're actually quite happy with the way that has evolved. There have been various iterations of the travel ban that have sort of got through the courts. It's clear, though, from this New York Times report that the president was deeply frustrated that the first version of the travel ban was stayed by the courts, and he felt that the second version and subsequent versions were watered down and didn't live up to exactly what he was saying and what he was promising his supporters on the campaign trail. But it's clear that immigration is not just a key to Donald Trump's support among his political base, it's a motivating factor for him in his sort of personal political philosophy, and it's going to continue to be one of the most controversial political issues running up through the midterm elections year in the next year.
And of course, he's ending this year without fulfilling his #1 campaign promise, building that wall. All right,
and having Mexico pay for it.
And having Mexico pay for it, right. He sort of seemed to go back away from that as of late. All right, Kelly Jane Torrance, Stephen Collinson, thank you so much.
Thanks, Pamela.